It's kind of mental to think that this is the first actual budget in over 12 months. The last proper budget was in October 2021. Everything in between now and then, that whole mess, has just been fiscal events. What's even crazier is the present Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, didn't even deliver that budget. This is his first, but his predecessor didn't deliver the budget either. Or his predecessor's predecessor.
Well, who did?
Rishi Sunak was still the Chancellor the last time we had a budget, and I think it's probably a bit of an understatement to say a lot has happened since then. So what has Jeremy got for us today? I've broken this video down into sections so you can jump to the bits that apply to you if you like, and I've also focused mainly on the things that impact families and individuals. I'm going to be launching a separate video later in the week where I look at the OBR report that accompanies the budget, which focuses around inflation and house price forecasts, all that good stuff. But today, like I said, I focus mainly on household finances. I've also covered at the end bits around business taxation and stuff, just in a little bit of detail, so I haven't missed that section off as well. But let's just start with a little bit of context, shall we? Much has been made about the fact that Jeremy Hunt's going to have more wiggle room in this budget. What they mean is, the figures for January in terms of government spending were a lot better than expected. KPMG forecasted that as a result, Hunt would have an extra 30 billion more than he thought that he could spend. I've seen that number range from 10 billion all the way to 40 billion in extra cash. The reason for this miraculous amount of money that we appear to have found down the back of the government's sofa includes boosted tax revenue. So they brought in more in tax as a result of them freezing tax bands. That meant lots of people who got pay rises are being forced into higher tax rates. Great, thank you. Also, the reporting period was in January when a lot of people had submitted self-assessments, around £21.9 billion worth. But in short, the government brought in more than they spent. While the books might be a little bit better than expected, government spending is still insanely high compared to the past. I think it's fair to say at this point that the country is just drowning in debt. We're spending around 120 billion a year on debt interest alone. Here's a stat for you. If debt interest was a government department, it would be the second largest department after just the Department of Health. Our debt interest bill, just the interest, is the same size as Slovakia's economy. So wiggle room in this sense is like being maxed out to the eyeballs on your credit card limits and then realising you got a love to shop voucher in your wallet from 11 months ago that you haven't used. Then, to add to this, record high inflation, the fact many of us struggle with the cost of living crisis, a stagnant economy, a tight labour market, and mass strikes across the public sector. So we can see this is a tricky situation. So this budget is being pinned as a growth budget, but not in the same way that Liz Truss's mini budget was, which was sweeping tax reforms. Jeremy is using his wiggle room to target very specific measures here, aimed really at easing some of those forces that are weighing down on the UK economy. Namely, the issues around the labour market and the cost of living crisis. Okay, well, that's the backdrop. Let's run through these now, starting with the labour market. So the Chancellor wants to get more people back into work to help the economy grow and to relieve the pressure on the tight labour market. The way he proposes to do this comes in many forms. The one that was most talked about before the budget was childcare. Anyone who has a child of any age knows how hard it is to work a job and to juggle childcare. School hours of 9 till 3:15ish don't really fit any job, and childcare costs in the UK are some of the highest on the planet. The average cost of putting a child into nursery part-time is over £8,000 a year currently. Part-time. Current schemes that provide free childcare apply to children over the age of 3. So if your child is 3 or under, there's just no support. And the cost for childcare at that age is usually higher anyway, as there are stricter requirements for the amount of staff that need to look after each child. This basically means, for many, it doesn't make much sense going to work when you've got a young child. Hunt said in his speech today, for many women, a career break becomes a career end. He's hoping these reforms will help 1 million people get back into work, and they look like this. Working parents in England will be able to access 30 hours of free childcare per week for 38 weeks of the year from when a child is older than 9 months to when they start school. This is going to be rolled out in stages. From April 2024, all working parents of 2-year-olds can access 15 hours per week. From September 2024, all working parents of children aged 9 months up to 3 years can also access 15 hours per week. And from September 2025, all working parents of children aged 9 months up to 3 years old can access 30 hours free childcare per week. Now, Jeremy said that they're staggering this rollout to allow the childcare sector to kind of cope with the increased demand as the little ones all get placed into nurseries. But for parents who may have been excited about this news, I imagine there's a large dose of disappointment that there won't be any benefits at all for 12 months. And because the full benefits won't roll out until 2025, most people with children under the age of 3 right now won't really benefit from this at all. I think it's great to provide these incentives to families to help parents work, and it would help productivity in this country, and not to mention the extra taxable income. But it seems strange to delay the rollout by a full 12 months. Why not just start right now? Might have something to do with the election, I don't know. I'm just sorry that this is disappointing for many parents who will have been looking at this and the headlines and getting excited. This feels a little bit like a promise that things are going to get better in the future, mañana, mañana. What families need is support right now. We see this pattern continue as well with wraparound childcare. This is the before and after school clubs that allow parents to drop kids off before school starts and then pick them up, 8 a.m. till 6 p.m. so they can go to work. They said that a third of all schools don't have these services at all, and they're planning to spend $289 million to ensure access in all schools. The issue is, it's going to take 2 years to roll out, and they're not going to start until September 2024. Why? There are also changes to universal credit child support and how that's paid. So currently it's paid in arrears, meaning if you go to work, you have to find the cash to pay for childcare initially, and then it gets paid back to you. This means many parents will go into debt or just simply can't do it. So they would just say, I can't work because of that. On the subject of universal credit, it also seems like they're changing the system, making the requirements stricter and providing those who are on universal credit more support in finding work. They hope that this will make 700,000 lead carers of children on universal credit look for work or increase their hours. There's also going to be more support for disabled workers, making it easier for them to participate in the workforce. Look, I don't know enough about the current system or these reforms to know if they're going to be effective, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I do and comment on them. If you do, or if this impacts you and you have a viewpoint, please comment below so that others can see that view. It'd be really useful. Okay, so the next labour market measure that I want to discuss is another big one, pensions. So these reforms are aimed at keeping people in the workforce longer and also encouraging people back into the workforce. They specifically mention NHS doctors. Currently, there are limits on how much you can pay or accumulate into your pension. £40,000 annual pay-in limit, and also the lifetime allowance, which is the total amount that workers can accumulate in their pension savings before paying extra tax. That was previously set at £1,073,100. They've raised the allowance from 40k to 60k and scrapped the lifetime allowance completely. So you can have as much money in your pension as you like without fear of being taxed at these aggressive additional rates. Now, I'm not sure how I feel about all of this. First of all, if you watch the pension video I made, you'll know anyone under the age of 40 is going to need to be a millionaire essentially to ensure a good standard of living at retirement due to inflation. So removing the lifetime allowance in a sense is good, but they chop and change it so much that you can't really look that far ahead, can we? We don't know what it's going to look like. So we can only really judge these changes on today's impacts. Now there's two ways that you might look at this. First of all, at a glance, this is a great benefit for high earners who might represent a typical Conservative voter, who can now dump loads of more money into their pension. In the Discord, which you gain access to by becoming a channel member or Patreon, is someone who worked for the DWP. He did some fag packet math and showed how a higher earner could now potentially max out an allowance at 60k a year, and when they die, pass on millions, potentially tens of millions in inheritance, completely tax-free, because inheritance tax at the minute doesn't apply to pensions. So with that 60k allowance and no upper limit, the rich can pile money into these schemes, benefit from tax rebates, and potentially shelter them from a lot of tax at the end. But there is the taper that exists for higher earners. The annual pension allowance reduces all the way down to 4k for higher earners, so those who earn above a certain limit lose that 40k allowance as it is. It's unclear if this is being scrapped now. That taper will dictate how beneficial these reforms are for the highest earners in society. We'll see if this gets scrapped or not. On the other side, though, is the fact that these reforms are being targeted at doctors, as Jeremy Hunt said. I've got a friend who's a doctor, and I asked him about the pension problem in the NHS and his reaction to these changes. It's at a point now where doctors are paying into pensions through their NHS incomes and are being issued tax bills at the end of the year because of the way the contributions are calculated on their defined benefit schemes. So their contributions are deducted at source. They have no choice about that either, unless they opt out of the pension, which would be silly. And then they're getting a letter at the end of the year going, oh, by the way, you owe us 10k in cash due to tax relief on your pension. The rising of the contribution allowance to 60k should hopefully stop this happening for many doctors. Also, the lifetime allowance means many senior doctors who are incredibly valuable to the NHS in terms of skills and knowledge see less incentive to keep working as they've maxed out their pensions, basically. So they cut their hours down to leave the NHS altogether. I just spat all over the desk. My friend put it like this.
Public sector pay is not as good as private sector pay, but one of the great things about the public sector is the pension. But if you're sort of reaching a point where you've kind of milked that to its capacity, you're maybe thinking, is there really much point in me continuing to work in the public sector if I'm not getting that pension benefit as well? I may as well just work in the private sector where I'm going to be paid much higher an hourly rate.
He chatted to a senior consultant this morning as well in their 50s who have said they will now be considering staying in the NHS longer solely due to these reforms this morning. So it does appear that it's helping doctors out. The thing about pensions is this lifetime allowance, they chop and change it so much. I have little to no confidence in this being the rule forever. I can see how the Conservative government might go, there's an opportunity here to make doctors happy and higher earners who typically vote for us, all with one policy. Then those steps can be reversed or watered down in the future, or they might just scrap the inheritance tax on pensions to get the tax in that way instead of messing around with lifetime allowances all the time. This is good right now for some people in society, but I would be shocked if this was the last time we spoke about pension allowances. Speaking of allowances, ISA allowances stay the same. So the Resolution Foundation can f*** off with their proposals of capping ISAs at 100k. Jeremy Hunt clearly watched my video and read the comments and decided that was not a fight worth fighting. But no, seriously, the one thing that we need to consider is by keeping the allowance the same, inflation being 10%, in real terms, we can actually pay less into our ISAs now than we could a year ago. This is the same with income tax brackets, which are also remaining the same, besides the proposed changes last year. Remember I said at the start about people being pushed into higher tax brackets and the government getting more tax revenue as well. This is called fiscal drag or stealth tax. And by keeping the brackets as they are, and with inflation meaning that people are getting pay rises, more people enter into higher tax bands, meaning they're paying a higher effective rate of tax. When I say tax rates are staying the same, the proposed changes to bring the 150 level down to 125 is still going through. I mean, there's no new changes, there's no surprise announcements. Another surprise non-announcement was there was no discussion on public sector pay, which did surprise me as I thought they might use this as an opportunity to maybe up public sector pay to alleviate strike action. Okay, now let's talk about cost of living. And let's start with energy bill support. The government has reversed the plan to make energy support less generous, which will mean our bills will stay the same and don't rise. They will honour this until July, where it's expected that the price of wholesale energy will have fallen enough that the cap is no longer needed. I know many people will be saying, well, wholesale prices have fallen massively already. How come our bills are not yet reflecting this? And I think that's a great question. I'll link a video below from Martin Lewis where he explains this in detail so that you can watch that if you want. There are critics of the measures saying that the help should just be targeted at those in lower income households. But honestly, what is a lower income household anymore? I can afford my bill, unlike many, but it's still a massive cost in my house that's impacted my quality of life. I currently pay around £450 a month for energy. Between me and my partner, we bring in a good amount of money, but I can see how there would be households considered well off that if they didn't get this support would really struggle. So I personally think that this approach is the right approach, for everyone, but that's just my view. Fuel duty has been frozen. There was due to be a rise of 12p per litre across petrol and diesel prices, but it's been frozen again. And the 5p cut that is being applied will continue for another year. It has been nice the last few weeks to see the cost of filling up my car coming down. So there's another section of this budget that's aimed at businesses. I'm going to briefly touch on it because I know it doesn't apply to many people watching this and I've probably already bored you to tears with this dry ass video that I've made. The key big change is called full expensing. This will be effective from April 2023 and will run until 2026. So no issue getting that one over the line, have they? Basically, if you spend on certain things like machinery, technology, equipment, you can deduct the full cost of it off your tax bill that year instead of spreading the cost out over years. That makes it cheaper for you to buy that now, as you will essentially save 25p on every pound you spend that year. The idea is this will incentivise businesses to invest in growth. There's also a 50% rate for stuff like solar panels that aren't covered by the 100% rate. And then there's a load of incentives as well for companies that spend lots of money on research and development, which I think is a stab to attract tech startups and such to this country. I'll link the overview of both sections of everything that we've discussed below for you so that you can take a read if you want. But just to conclude my thoughts on all of this, coming into this, many expected changes to childcare, but the news that there's a delay has meant really that it kind of falls flat of expectations. And it's annoying because it's something that could have really helped loads of people out, both in terms of just cost outlay in their homes, putting extra money in people's pockets, but also freeing up people to go to work, empowering individuals and couples to earn more money. The fact that 1/3 of schools don't even offer after school clubs in this country, like what hope does a single parent of any of those schools have of finding work that consistently fits around the school day? There's only so many jobs that will let you work 9 till 3 or 9:30 till 3. I think the government could have done better here introducing the rollout of support straight away. Even if it was just 10 hours a week, it's better than nothing, right? With the pensions, I know that cynics will say that the pension reforms are a vote grab, and maybe they are. But speaking to my doctor mate, who is honestly the smartest guy I know, he could have earned ridiculous amounts of cash working in finance, and he chose to be a doctor because he wanted to help people. Anything that makes staying in the NHS more attractive for people like him is a good thing in my books. Let's just see how long it lasts for before they start fiddling again. I'll get the OBR report review out this week, guys, which will be far more enlightening around stuff like inflation and when that might come down, and also the housing market direction. So yeah, look out for that, and thank you as always.